A really critical thing to understand is that a prompt is fundamentally the input that we have into the model, and we have a limitation on the size of the prompt that we can create. So we can't go and create a prompt of unlimited size. Every single large language model is going to have some fundamental limit on how much we can put into our prompt and send to it. And so this is an important thing to note because it has a lot of ramifications on thinking about prompt design. So I'm going to show you a quick example of this with ChatGPT and GPT 3.5. So I'm going to paste in the Wikipedia article that's related to the French Revolution. So I've pasted in a huge amount of text from the French Revolution that's described in Wikipedia. And what does ChatGPT say? It says, well, the message you submitted was too long. Please reload the conversation and submit something shorter. Now, this shows you an important point. We can't just give it unlimited information. Now, if we go back and we think about some of the things we talked about, some of the dimensions of prompt, one of the ways that we can use a prompt is to introduce new information that ChatGPT or another large language model wasn't trained on. So if we want to go and introduce new information to it, we have to be aware that there's a limit to the amount of information we're going to be able to give to it at once. So we may have all kinds of new information that we'd like to give to ChatGPT, but we can't just dump it all in at once and then say, now start reasoning on this. That's not the way it works. So one of the goals that we have as users is to try to select and use only the information that we need in order to perform the task that we're asking ChatGPT to perform. So we can't just go and dump everything under the sun in there and say, hey, ChatGPT, figure it out. We can go in and dump in a lot, and depending on the model, we may be able to do more or less, but we have to be, to some degree, we have to be editors. We're content editors. We are editing the context of information, and we have a budget. We can't just go and dump unlimited amounts, and you can think of it basically as like you're trying to create a paper and you have a page limit for your paper, or you have a word limit for an article that you're writing. You can't just go in and dump things, arbitrarily. So what do? Well, one, we have to think about what is the most important information to actually provide. So let's say, for example, that we really care about October 5th, 1789. Well, if that's the case, that's what we want to paste in for ChatGPT to reason about. And then we could go and we could say, what happened on October 5th? And then it would go and tell us what happened on October 5th. But now if we ask it a question that is outside of the scope of October 5th and something it wasn't trained on. Now in this case, it was probably trained on the information regarding the French Revolution because obviously that was before 2021. But if we had new information we wanted to incorporate, we have to think about how do we put that information into our budget. So what are some ways that we can do that? How can we take large amounts of information and try to get it into our budget? Well, one, we can be selective about what we include. We can basically, outside of ChatGPT, go and run some type of query or filter. So we can go and select what pieces of information are going to be relevant to the task. And there's lots of ways of doing this, and I'm not going to go into all of them. We can have a filter. We can say this type of information is not relevant. Remove it before we provide it to ChatGPT. Another thing that we can do is we can actually go and have that information summarized in a way that we think will preserve what's needed to reason about it. So for example, we might say, well, maybe we can't paste in all of the information related to it, but we could say, we're going to take this and summarize each paragraph. Summarize this information in one sentence. And then we would get some type of summary. And now this is slightly shorter than the original, so we have now a one-sentence summary of what happened. We could try to give it a word budget. So one way we can do it is we could actually take all the different pieces of information and we can ask ChatGPT or another large language model to summarize that information for us, and then we can take that summary and reuse it later. And we can put together several summaries, for example. Now, this only works if we make sure that the way that we summarize, or if we make sure that the way that we filter preserves the information that's needed for whatever task we're going to ask for. So we might go through, we could also go and say, we said summarize this information in one sentence. And instead we could say, summarize this information in one sentence. And I'm just going to, preserving information about numbers of people. And then we would get a summary that preserves the information about numbers. Now, if you look at the original summary, we see up here it didn't keep the number of people. And if that was something important that we needed to reason about, then we would have lost that. And so if we had summarized in that way and then used that information to do some reasoning that required the number of people, obviously we've lost what we need. Down here we've asked it to summarize, but we've asked it to summarize in order to keep certain information or in order to accomplish a particular task. So we did it by saying basically summarize this information in one sentence, preserving information about numbers of people. We could have also gone and asked ChatGPT, preserving information needed to reason about the population or to reason about how many people were in the resistance or in the National Guard. We could have given context. So one of the things we have to be cognizant of is this budget on the size of our prompt is going to be a fundamental limitation that we are always trying to work around. Now, as large language models get bigger, they will probably reach a size where for many practical tasks, particularly when we are directly manually interacting with a large language model, that size doesn't really matter because we can just copy and paste, 50 pages of text into the model and ask it to provide us information out of there or perform a task based on it. But if you can think about how much information we're dealing with on a daily basis, there are probably going to be different types of tasks where there's going to be so much information we can't dump it all in at once. And when we get into those types of situations, we have to think about either querying and getting a subset of information like only the documents or only the parts of documents that are relevant. 2, we have to think about filtering. How do we remove information that's extraneous? 3, we have to think about how do we summarize or compress that information before we give it to the large language model. And one of the ways that we can do that, as we've just seen, is we can actually give chunks of information to the large language model and then ask it to essentially summarize or compress it for us in order to later use it for reasoning. We could also go and we can say summarize or compress this information in order to accomplish a particular task or in order to preserve these aspects of the information. And that can help us to create summaries or essentially condensed versions of the information that preserve the important pieces. So this can be a powerful technique when we go and begin needing to reason on larger and larger amounts of information.